Your novel, Mornings in Jenin, is a saga of multiple families. You yourself, born of parents displaced in the '67 war, and you grew up in Kuwait, Jordan, and East Jerusalem, came to the US, educated in South Carolina, and you've done a lot of things, having moved to fiction, but also building playgrounds for Palestinian children in various refugee camps and in Palestine. And I don't think it spills a secret to say that your favorite author, as you mentioned yesterday, is Gabriel Garcia Marquez and 100 Years of Solitude. Not quite sure how that plays into this, but I'd love to hear more about the motivation of your novels, some of the key questions, some of the key personal challenges, and more broadly, this role of literature in conflict.
Sure. Thank you all very much for being here. I'm really delighted to be taking part in this festival. Mornings in Jenin, very broadly, is the story of one Palestinian family over 4 generations. It spans 60 years of this conflict, and it begins in the early 1940s during Mandate Palestine. And as it moves through to 1948, the family from the village of Abulhawa was expelled, as many Palestinian villagers were expelled from their ancestral homes. And in the mayhem, one of the youngest child was abducted by an Israeli soldier by the name of Moshe. And Moshe was married to a woman by the name of Jenin, who had survived the Holocaust, and they raised Ismail as David. Fast forward, and I'm not giving away the whole story, but this is just the basic premise. And although the story spans 4 generations, it's mostly the story of these 3 siblings. In the '67 war, young Ismail, who is now David, comes face to face with his brother Yusuf on opposite sides of the war. And although this aspect of the novel has been the most intriguing as far as reviewers have been concerned, it's actually a tangent to the primary story, which is the story of Aman. And Aman is the youngest sibling who was born in a refugee camp in Jenin. And her story takes us through, like I said, 60 years and over 5 countries into the present day Israeli occupation. In his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, John Steinbeck said that literature grows from the human need for it. And reflecting on another Nobel before him, he said that William Faulkner, more than anyone, knew that the understanding and the resolution of fear are a large part of a writer's reason for being. Ultimately, this is the motivation for writing Mornings in Jenin. To me, literature is a place where we can all meet to discover our common humanity. And this becomes more critical when it involves people like the Palestinians, who are so demonized and so dehumanized that few even think of us in this country as anything more than a miscellaneous collection of crazy, irrational, violent Arabs. But in truth, I come from an ancient people who are native to Palestine, who had lived in that land and cultivated it for centuries, if not millennia. We are Muslim, we are Christian, and we are Jews, and we are atheists, Marxists. The Palestinian culture from which I come is beautiful, it is rich, it is intricate and complicated. It is a hospitable, generous, and distinct society, with its own unique dialect, food, traditions, and clothing. And like every society, we have our scoundrels and our saints, our immorals and moral, our mothers, our spinsters, our gossips and whores, our violent and our pacifists. We have our thugs and our loafers as we do our artists, our dancers, our writers, and our musicians. We have children whom we love and adore, and for whom we wish to create a better life. This is the reality that I know, and it's the reality that I want to convey through Mornings in Jenin. And this reality is incomplete without the reality that we are a people who are slowly being wiped off the map. A people who have and continue to be systematically expelled. A people who live under one of the cruelest military occupations of our time. This is the reality that has mostly been written about Palestinians, and these narratives exist mostly in the realm of history texts, like those by Israeli historians Benny Mars and Ilan Pappé, whose book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, was one of the resources that I've used in my research. It is the reality that continues to be featured in human rights reports, UN resolutions, and UN investigations, and some of these are even quoted in the novel. But a novel goes beyond these non-fiction narratives. It is where we can find each other in the fullness of our humanity, in both its wretched and noble manifestations. And so, Mornings in Jenin is a story for anyone who wants to know what the creation and expansion of Israel has meant to the native Palestinians. I conceived of this novel when a massacre occurred in Jenin, and so part of this book was inspired by the people of that camp and the stories that emerged from there in April of 2002. As far as how much of this is autobiographical, I think for a story to be authentic, that a writer can only really write about what he or she knows, not just on an intellectual level, but on an emotional and visceral level. At least that's what I find to be true for me. I don't think that necessarily means that a writer has to have lived the experiences that he or she writes about, but it does mean that we are to be wholly attached to our characters. I think it is important that we understand and or love our characters, and even more importantly, not to judge them, or to ascribe artificial motivations to their actions that might be self-serving to the writer. This prerequisite attachment to our characters and the visceral understanding of them, I think, is what gives some narratives an inherent authority. That said, while there are certainly some parallels between my life and the life of Amal, the main character, particularly her coming to the US and becoming a single mother of a daughter, she's still very separate from me, as are all the other characters who are separate from me and separate from each other. There is, however, one chapter in the book that is entirely autobiographical. It is called The Orphanage, and I put the lead character, Amal, into my life for the 3 years that I spent in an orphanage for girls in East Jerusalem. That institution, by the way, was established by a wealthy Palestinian heiress who comes from one of the oldest and most prominent Jerusalem families, the Husseinis. And this brings me to another important point about the role of literature and writers in depicting conflict. Whether the conflict is overt among people or whether it is an internal conflict of the heart, I believe that a writer's first and foremost loyalty should be to the characters, to tell their story with intellectual and emotional honesty, because the reader deserves to be able to trust the author, even if what they are reading is a work of fiction. The truth of a character's heart might not reconcile with the truth of other characters or even the truth of the reader, but that does not make it less worthy of telling. Novels, by definition, are meant to narrate a story, and all stories are told through the subjective lens of each person's experiences. And separate from this, however, are the current and historical facts. Although it may be inevitable that a writer might take liberties with some small insignificant facts like location, names of places, or names of individuals, I think a writer has a moral and ethical duty to present the larger facts of a conflict unblemished, where they might arise in the backdrop or in the plot of a novel. Finally, and hopefully, a novel is told with an artistry that is unique to each writer, which provides a loftiness of language, and more importantly, I think, a heartbeat, a human heartbeat to the story. These things, in my opinion, are what distinguish literature from other forms of writing, such that not all fiction is literature, and certainly not all literature is fiction. And writing this novel, for me, has been a truly tremendous journey in many ways. a very long one. One of the most satisfying rewards has been receiving letters from readers of all backgrounds from all over the world, in which they tell me how much this novel has impacted them. In most instances, they relate to me that Mornings in Jenin has opened their eyes and hearts and has spurred them to do their own research, which is something I wholeheartedly encourage. I am grateful and humbled by the reviews, which have mostly been laudatory. I'm also grateful for some of the criticisms, which have also been important and enlightening. There has been, however, one criticism that I've heard from a few readers which I do not accept nor respect. And it is that this novel is one-sided, as if such criticism has any validity in a novel. As Palestinians, we are facing our own extinction. It is our right to claim our own space in literature. After multiple mass expulsions and persistent confiscation of properties, home demolitions, evictions, the building of illegal settlements and bypass roads, what remains to us now are isolated Bantuistans, which comprise less than 12% of our historic homeland. And in those small Bantustans, the well-documented, grinding, and systematic oppression, humiliation, and daily violence against us, what that the UN Commission for Human Rights has described as, quote, grave breaches of the Fourth Geneva Convention by Israel and the occupied Arab territories constitute war crimes and an affront to humanity, unquote. This occupation is what spurred the moral icon of our time, Nelson Mandela, to declare that, quote, we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians, unquote. He made this statement in the same spirit that individuals, prominent and otherwise, organizations, churches, labor unions, municipalities around the world, students, academics, artists, and more, who have joined the call to boycott and divest from Israel, as the world did from South Africa during the apartheid years, until it complies with international law and basic human rights. These are people of conscience. They are Christians, Muslims, Jews, atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Hindus. They include Nobel laureates and housewives, artists and writers and computer programmers. They include Holocaust survivors, intellectuals, European members of parliament, and army colonels. They include young Israeli men and women who refuse to serve in Israel's army in order to, quote, expel, starve, and humiliate an entire people, unquote. They include veteran Israeli soldiers who have been spurred by their own conscience to speak out, forming a group called Breaking the Silence, where they detail the crimes they committed and witnessed.
Susan, may I ask you to come to a close in a moment?
Jews are a very important part of our history. I say that because I believe that what Israel is doing is contrary to the fundamental teachings of Judaism. They are an important part of Palestinian history as well as histories throughout the Middle East. It is the one place where we all lived, all three monotheistic religions lived in relative harmony. And I look forward to the day when the goal is to return to that kind of pluralistic, multicultural society that Palestine had always been.
Susan, I'd like to ask you to stop there after the 12 minutes is up. Briefly, Alan?
Was it? Yeah?
That's
fine.
Been up for a bit, but